ChoralEd.
Welcome to another episode of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today, in episode 9, as we conclude our series on choral tone, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the show Dr. Sean Pullen from West Texas A&M University. Dr. Pullen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So to begin, can you describe for us your ideal choral tone?
My ideal choral tone begins with resonance. I want my choirs to sing with a lifted tone, with an equally lifted tone from the basses all the way to the sopranos. I'm not looking for a lot of differences between the sections. I want them to have a lifted, resonant tone that resounds, whether it's at a forte dynamic or a pianissimo dynamic.
And so for maybe to clarify some terms here, when you say lifted, you're talking about the resonance and placement, or what are you kind of referring to in lifted?
Lifted placement is what I'm looking for. I'm wanting them to place their sound up in the resonant cavity and to be always resonant, rather than putting their resonance here, more resonant at the cheekbones up and into the nasal resonator.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that. And so when it comes to maybe breath flow or breath support, do you have any thoughts about that? Yeah.
Sure. I'm sorry I interrupted your question, but the breath must be connected in order to create that resonance. I don't talk a lot about breath support in my choir, but the product that I want from my choirs implies that breath support is needed. I work with advanced singers. They know a lot about breath support at this point. When I work with younger singers, I have to get into that a little bit more, because if you don't have that breath support, then you can't get past this area. You've got to really connect it with support down low and sort of put it into the resonance. And so they have to work through that a bit. When young singers learn how to do that, sometimes they even put too much breath into it so that it actually defeats their resonance, and they have to learn to experiment with how much air it takes to create that sound that I'm looking for, and then how much they don't need. Sometimes they use too much, and it actually makes it just as breathy as if they were just to use little air. They have to experiment, and so it takes some time to get to that sound, and I'm willing to take the time to get to that sound through experimentation.
For sure. And you mentioned that importance of and finding that balance of the breath, and that's always a challenge for those beginning singers. And you also mentioned that you work with advanced singers, and so do you ever spend much time talking about vibrato, or do you have an ideal about what vibrato should be like for your singers?
I spend a lot of time asking my students not to allow their vibrato to get in the way of the music, or in the way of intonation, or in the way of choral blend. I don't particularly like to tell my singers to cease using vibrato, or to become strident in their tone in order to create a straight tone. I prefer words like a clean sound, something that's going to be in the center of the pitch, that's going to remain in the center of the pitch. Vocal control, being controlled for the sake of the music, rather than simply saying your vibrato is getting in the way of everything. I generally try to connect it to the mission that we have of making music properly, and especially as an ensemble, being able to blend volume wise, being able to center the pitch, making sure our chords are in tune. And so the vibrato can get in the way depending on which group I'm working with in the year. Sometimes I have big voices in my choir. Sometimes I have, voices that are not so big. And so it kind of depends on the year, who I'm working with, but usually I don't have any, I can, it's not as hard as you might think to get singers to think about how they're using the vibrato or how they might avoid some of it, as it is just to kind of help people understand that we're trying to make the music right rather than for our voices to be shown off among the crowd. So
Do you ever ask for different tone colors based on the style of music or the song that you select?
yes, as a matter of fact, I prepared a little bit before we came to this interview, and I one of the points I would make is that is needed sometimes, depending on the style. If you're singing a spiritual, as opposed to a piece from the Renaissance, you might choose a different color. Colors are important to the different style eras. They're important to even our modern styles that are different from each other. However, resonance should be constant, and that I think sometimes we try to make Brahms sound too different from Palestrina, and what we end up doing is we over darken using the concept of different colors, and so and we change our resonance, we change some of the things that we're doing for the sake of the style. And I think that's important to an extent, but sometimes we overdo it. We need to make resonance a constant, and sometimes we muffle or overcover or do the opposite and over brighten. Using this idea of colors, we sacrifice some of the constants that we need to have in our tone qualities.
I think that's a great point that there is, some room for, keep that center tone that you want, but there's room to adjust it, but not overdone. And that becomes just like, is this a new choir, a totally different choir?
Right.
Sometimes
Exactly.
a little confusing to the audience.
If you listen to a lot of the professional choirs like Tenebrae or the Monteverdi Choir or the 16, you'll hear that they're rather consistent in their application of their resonance, from one style to another. You won't hear them sing Bruckner with much of a different sound than they would sing Palestrina. It would be pretty close.
For sure. Well, before we go on to more questions, I want to take a brief moment here to pause and to share with our viewers an audio sample of this choral tone that Dr. Pullen has just been talking about. So here is a performance by the West Texas A&M University Chorale. Enjoy. Thanks for sharing such a great performance with us. To watch the entire performance, check out the link in the description of this video, and while you're there, hit that like and subscribe button. So back to some questions. Are there specific vocal exercises that you incorporate to achieve your ideal choral tone?
I use warm-ups before most rehearsals, and my warm-ups are geared toward resonant sound. I use a lot of short sounds in my warm-ups, like if I'll go ha 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 ha, I'll use those short sounds because I believe that short sounds are um, they require the singer to create an initial attack of resonance, and so and without it, then they just get breathiness on the ha, 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 ha. If they sing it short, then they're immediately resonant, so that when they come to the descending scale at the end of that, they'll hopefully keep the resonance that they provided for the first two notes. So I use a lot of short sounds. I might not even do a long sound at all in a warm up. So I might just go ha 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 ha, and that way they're just using short sounds, really getting an idea of how they use their air, how they create that resonance in a controlled fashion. I use a lot of evals in not just in warm-ups, but in just neutral vowels for singing a piece of music. If we've learned the notes and I feel like we need to move to a neutral vowel, sometimes I'll use an oo, but oftentimes I'll use an eval, just because it's a lifted sound. It's a horizontal vowel that makes them maybe even lift up the cheek muscles and sing that E also with the tongue in its natural placement. They have to keep the tongue flat on an eval, so it creates good vocal technique while they're singing a resonant sound. So humming is something I do a lot, even in warm-ups. I'll begin a rehearsal just humming. For one thing, humming just, if they come in talking, humming is a great way to get people to sort of shut their mouths and start rehearsing, but it also creates resonance. You cannot hum without resonance, without connecting to the resonant cavity. So it's I don't get very detailed in warm-ups. What I want them to do is begin rehearsal with resonance, get their voices warmed up, yes, but the resonance is what I'm looking for. I want them to continue to into rehearsal with that same lifted sound.
Absolutely. So, and you also mentioned the cheekbones there, cheek muscles there. Does that go into your lifted sound and the placement of the resonance much? And do you talk about that a lot in your rehearsals?
Yes, I probably make more facial expression in my conducting with my face lifted than I even ask my singers to do. I probably don't talk about it enough. I am a bit of a demonstrator in rehearsal, and not much of a talker in rehearsal. So if we repeat something and I want them to do something a little bit different, it may not even be spoken. I might just simply say, okay, you sound like this. Now I need you to sound like this. Or I might not even give the instructions. Just hopefully I'm demonstrating what I want them to do with the lifted cheek muscles.
That's great that they can, just visually see it and adjust, and or maybe just get a reminder about, what you're wanting. And so you also mentioned about the eval during a neutral syllable for rehearsal. And so are there other rehearsal techniques like that you find helpful in refining choral tone?
Um, well, other techniques would be just using other vowels. I believe vowels are so important to our resonance. If I feel that there needs to be an adjustment to the sound of the choir, I might use a different vowel. Sometimes if you sing on an eval, it can become so so lifted that it becomes sort of pinched and not as pleasant. It becomes sort of at the listener rather than inviting the listener to come to the choir to listen. So I might change to an O vowel that is also sort of centers the pitch, but it tempers the timbre to a point where it makes it perhaps makes it a little bit more pleasant. So adjustments are made for me through using vowels. And I do hum through our music quite a bit. I have them hum. I even have them sing a lot of staccato singing from maybe even from start to finish of a piece, depending on how long it is. And staccato singing is great for promoting intonation. They have to sing that pitch immediately, or they won't, or you'll find out really quickly that they don't know it. But it's also good that shortness requires resonance. When you sing with short sounds, you can't help but sing with a resonant tone. So we will sing even on the words a short staccato to clarify their pitch and their tone quality.
Great. And so you also mentioned, and I think it's a great thing to remind us of being careful of not overusing a certain vowel, of always using E or A or O, and these. If overusing it too much, I think we can get an unwanted tone because we get into this more strident or more all darker vowel. So it's important for us always to keep in mind of changing the vowel and getting the different sounds for the different vowels that we have, because we don't just sing everything on one vowel, which would be really easy, I'm sure, at times, but we don't have that opportunity. Do you have any approaches during auditions and or the placement of singers in a standing arrangement that help you establish your preferred tone?
I don't use techniques that much in auditions. I use very simple vocalises in my auditions because I want to hear what the singer naturally does on their own. I want to hear the reality of a singer. I don't give a lot of instruction in auditions because I don't want the singer to manipulate their usual sound in order to impress me. I want them to sing the sound that they would choose to sing based upon their experience of what is good and their concept of good sound. And then I will make decisions based upon that. Do I like this singer for a soprano section? And I'm very particular with my soprano sections. One of the reasons I had an experience in I think it was 2005, way back in the day. Took a choir to LA, and Charlene Archibek heard my choir. And she came up after the concert and she said, she was complimenting the soprano section. And it was a section that I had spent more time with the soprano section than any other section in that choir. And I told her that. I said I was so happy that she had mentioned them because the sopranos were who I had worked on the most. And she said, well, of course, they're the ones you hear. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, she's right about that. We hear everyone in the choir, but we definitely hear the soprano section. And so if I hear a treble voice in my audition, then I'm asking myself the question, first of all, where do I want to put this singer? Even if that singer is a high voice, do I want that singer to sing in the soprano section of a particular choir? Do I want that singer to sing alto? Do I want a tenor to sing some alto sometimes? Does that tenor have that ability? Does this bass have it? this lower voice have the ability to sing some tenor the way I would like that tenor to sing? Is their natural inclination something that I can trust to be what I want it to be in that choir? And of course, we're looking for other things about their abilities in an audition, but tone has always been number one to me, as far as where do I want to place this singer, and then how do I place them in the choir. Rehearsal to me is different than performance. I differ from some colleagues. Some colleagues will want to put their choirs in the formation that they're going to perform in from start to finish. And I differ. I like a rehearsal placement of singers and then a concert placement of singers. So I'll place them in a formation that will be conducive to the sound that I want. So I might put my best sound in the middle of the section so that everyone surrounding that singer is looking to that singer, somehow hearing that singer and forming a concept of sound based upon who I think is the ideal of that section, who is the ideal of the choir, who is the ideal of that section. And then hopefully that person is having an influence on the people in front of them or around them. But in concert, I want them to have achieved that sound about 3 weeks before we get onto the stage. And I might put the best sound on the front row. Or if that best sound is too loud from the front row, I'll push them back a little bit. In concert, I use what I've been told by colleagues to be the radio technique. You want that sound to be as if they were around one microphone, and that front row is going to be what that microphone really picks up, because that's who the audience is going to hear the most. So I'll put my ideal sound to where the audience is going to experience that ideal sound. It's not that the other singers in the choir are not creating that ideal sound, but I'm a bit of a control freak as far as what I want the audience to hear. So I'm going to I'm going to set up my choir to where they're hearing the best, and then realizing that the whole choir is really what I want them to sound like.
Absolutely. You brought up a lot of great points in there, and I think one of the ones that really surprises a lot of people, and it surprised me when I kind of first read about it, was you talking about that, you said the radio, I think, sound, where there's the theory that placing them in the front, actually there is the distance thing, and that's the sound that reaches the audience first, and that's what they perceive more of because they hear it first. It's a weird kind of oral experience for them, but that's a very interesting point that people don't really think about placing their ideal sound in the front, which is a little surprising to some people. And then I also had to kind of chuckle a little bit and think about back when I sang in your choir for that 1 year. Where was I placed? I don't know. I don't know. Was I in the middle of the section? I don't know.
You were on the front row.
In the front row.
I don't really remember, but
I don't remember either. I don't think I was in the front row, but I had to like chuckle about that. Where was I placed or your choir?
Right. I have that same conversation with my ChoralEd students, and they ask the same question. So.
That's right. Well, do you have any final thoughts or anything that maybe came to mind as we were talking about tone, and anything you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, my final thought for young singers is that I enjoyed teaching young singers for 11 years at Clear Creek High School, and one of the things I felt like I learned from that experience is that people are so capable of making all different kinds of sounds that to me, it's not difficult to help students learn that they can make different sounds. I think sometimes our singers come to our rehearsals for the first time and think, well, this is who I am. This is the singer that I am. These are the sounds that I make. And we find them to be more stubborn than they really are. If we can teach them all different kinds of sounds, we can even create sounds that aren't even human or even what living beings can create. We can mimic so many sounds in the world that getting across the point that our singers can do things differently really isn't as hard as we would like, as we think it is. We can help them learn to do formal sounds as opposed to informal sounds simply by the experimentation in rehearsal. And it can be really fun. We can sound like animals. We can sound like sirens outside on the street. We have so many ways that we can demonstrate differences that it gets across the point to the students that, hey, you know, my voice is really capable of creating those formal sounds that my choir director wants to hear. I'm similarly created to like, I'm just like another singer, maybe even a professional singer. I have a voice, I have a resonant cavity, I have a soft palate, I have all of those things. I can make my voice sound formal. It's not as hard as we might think to get that point across in our rehearsals and to our young kids. I think sometimes we sell singers short. They're not as stubborn as we think. We just need to be persistent and expecting the sound that we want from our choir.
I think that last point was just great, that and I'm guilty of it too, that we focus so much on we want this sound from our choir that we don't really spend a lot of time experimenting with all the sounds they can make, and then you can kind of pick and choose from those and kind of mix those into the sound that you want and really kind of form it, and they're more relaxed, more free to kind of do all these changes that you're asking for instead of trying to force them into one thing that you always ask for. That's a great point, and I will plan to implement that myself in my own choirs for sure. Well, Dr. Pullen, I want to say thank you again so much for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure talking with you. And to our viewers, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.
Thank you.